Okay, welcome to another live episode of GeekOutdoors.com. At least that's what that's telling me. And so this week, got a couple of things, or actually three things normally, that I'm going to be talking about. First is the NotPetya Ransomware. We have the Sega Forever, and finally the SNES or Super Nintendo Classic. Now, this thing with the NotPetya Ransomware, unfortunately, I just talked about Linux ransomware last week on my live episode, and I'll leave that in the description area below if you wanted to see that. And then remember last month we had the whole WannaCry incident as well. So it seems like every week I might be talking about this stuff, and unfortunately that's not something that I want to talk about, but it is something that it is affecting a lot of people. It is very important, and unfortunately, it's not anything that's going to go away. If anything, it's going to be happening more and more. And so, if you haven't seen the news or have heard about it, the most recent destructive ransomware, and it's one that's pretty nasty, is called the NotPetya, okay, or it's also been called Goldeneye as well. And some people still refer to it as the Petya ransomware as well. And so what this ransomware does is it basically did something similar to the WannaCry, meaning that it uses the same NSA exploit, which is based on the Eternal Blue exploit, which basically takes advantage of a flaw with the SMB file share for Windows. Okay, so SMB is the protocol in order to share files between Windows devices, okay? And SMB is also used on Linux as well, but it's primarily for Windows. And so it uses that same exploit. And so what this one did was it got in through a very popular tax software, a Russian tax software. It's called Medox. That is the software. And what it did was it actually embedded itself in that software as an update, and obviously these software updates goes out to a lot of customers and clients, and when that happened, it just spread, and it's over like 200,000 people, or actually machines, have been infected. And this one's nasty because it hit, once again, really big companies. This one, it actually hit companies like FedEx, Merck, Cadbury, Moeller, which is a Danish shipping company. And it also affected some banks and even an oil company as well. And so this was definitely not something light at all. And it primarily started in the Ukraine, as a matter of fact. And it was the Ukraine that was the first place that was affected. And then from there, it just spread mostly through Europe and then all around the world after that. And this one's a particularly nasty one because unlike the WannaCry, right, which was ransomware, and basically what that means is it encrypts everything on your device, and then in order for you to get access to your information, you would have to pay whoever these people are who created it, and then they would send you a key, and then hopefully that would unlock your or decrypt your actual data. Now this one's a little bit different because it does do the decryption as well, but unlike the WannaCry, this actually affects your MBR, or master boot record file, meaning that whenever you restart your operating system, you can't get into it. I mean, it'll actually just start up and then it'll show a screen where it's going to ask you for this ransomware. Okay, and what's really different about this one is that they're asking for $300, and the email that it had on there, it's no longer working, so you can't even pay them to get your actual key. And at the same time, it looks like this was a cyberware attack, okay, from Russia to the Ukraine. That's what it looks like right now. And so the whole purpose of this one wasn't meant to get money, okay? It was meant to destroy data and really disrupt a lot of economies, okay? And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And because of that, if this thing hits your actual computer, okay, which is Windows based, that's what it affects. It affects Windows based computers. You're screwed. I mean, it's just consider your data gone. Okay, now for individual users, it's absolutely not a fun thing to have. But when it affects companies, institutions, governments, things that have really critical data and critical services, that's when it becomes a huge problem. And that's why cyber warfare is a real thing. Okay, and in terms of them being any type of fixes for this, now this started Tuesday of this week at the time of this video, and so this is fairly recent. And as I've stated earlier, it's affected more than 200,000 machines so far. And the thing with this one is there is no turn-off date. Okay, so the WannaCry, if I remember correctly, it had like a turn-off date, like a date that it would not run anymore. In this case, there is no turn-off date, so it could perpetually keep spreading and not ever turn off. Okay, which is really nasty in and of itself. And since there is no way to fix this at this point, it's going to constantly spread. Okay, now on the last episode that I did on this, one of the things that everybody says, or at least the media outlets will say, well, if they would patch their systems, we wouldn't have this problem. But as I stated in my earlier episode, whatever you're thinking of, businesses, governments, institutions, so forth, they don't have like one or two machines, and they have literally maybe hundreds or thousands of machines. And if you multiply that by the thousands of programs and services that run on it, it's not like a simple matter for you to just say, hey, let's update a patch and we'll restart our machines and our computers. No, it's simply not like that. It's way more complex. And so that's why when things like this happen, the general answer from the media outlets is they should have patched their systems. Yeah, it's not that simple. And the reason I also say that is because look at these companies that are being affected. We're talking about Merck. It's multi-billion-dollar drug company. We're talking about companies like FedEx. We're talking about national oil companies. Banks. So these companies have the money to get whatever services that they need. So, but here's a perfect example where it's simply not that easy. All right, Lance is on. Cool. Rose Manejo. Yes. What's going on, Rose? And from last week, Rose did ask the question from my last live episode, like how come they don't patch their systems? And you could go back to the episode, but just in general, I'm just explaining to you how complex this is. Okay, and even when you patch their systems, we live in a fast-moving technology age. There could be new exploits created to basically remove any benefit you get from putting the patch. And so it's a constant battle of trying to really take care of this. Or, basically you're never going to be able to take care of this because there's always going to be new exploits. And also, this brand new exploit or the brand new ransomware, when people think about like antivirus programs, okay, and if you understand or you have more information on this, please feel free to chime in. Antivirus programs are reactive programs. They're not really proactive, because in order for antivirus programs to work, they can really only help you on programs that they already know about, viruses, malware, and so forth. So unfortunately, that thing has to be out there first affecting people before the companies can actually identify it. Okay, the software can identify it. And obviously, the software can learn patterns, so it could kind of look for new things, but the majority of times, antivirus programs are reactive. Okay, they're not proactive. So that's why when you have these new exploits and you're wondering, like, how come these antivirus programs didn't figure out that this was a virus or malware? It's because it doesn't know about it. So that's in general the simple truth about antivirus programs. And so, all right, Choose Living Southern Organics on. Awesome. So Lance had a question, a little off topic. Have you done or would you consider doing a video on how to install Linux on a MacBook? Well, I would, Lance, if I actually had Apple products. I don't have any Apple products, so I can't do that. I have older videos where I show you how to install it on Windows machines or any machine. And I think, in my opinion, if you do it on a virtual machine, it's the same. Okay, so all my tutorials are done on a virtual machine. I think I only had one tutorial where I actually installed it on these older laptops itself, but they were Windows machines. So to answer your question, Lance, no, I don't have any Apple products, so there's not a way for me to do that. But thanks for that. And to Living Southern Organics asks, companies mostly problem don't even know they get hit. That's correct. You know, whenever these exploits or hit, you know, or whatever these ransomware viruses, whatever the case hit, most companies, they won't know. You know, and even like these big companies who have billions of dollars. I mean, these are big companies. These aren't small companies. Even they aren't aware of these things until they actually start spreading. So you can understand how difficult it is, as I just mentioned in my last episode, how difficult it is to actually, you know, like number one, identify this, and then number two, to actually prevent and then fix these things. It's very, very challenging. Okay, so, and Lance is saying my cousin is bringing over an old MacBook and wants Linux on it. Yeah, you know, Lance, if you already have Linux on your machine, which I think you do, I think that if your cousin already knows Linux, you know, why don't you show him on your machine, or maybe why don't you like recommend that he install a virtual box or some type of virtual machine in his Mac operating system, so then that way he could see if he likes it. You know, so he could actually still use Linux within Mac. You know, that way he doesn't have to like, you know, like brick his MacBook. And as you know, with Apple products, they're pretty, it's not as easy to install things or change things on Mac, you know, than it is on a Windows machine or a Linux machine. That's a good idea. Thank you. No problem, Lance. That's what I would do. I would kind of always default back to doing a virtual machine first. Rose asked, perhaps do a tutorial on how to set up conky cool games in the background after Afterburner. Yes, I always have cool games in the background. Maybe, you know, maybe Rose. I mean, like, I think I've mentioned many times in my videos, I don't really do distro hopping, or I don't even install or reinstall different operating systems, you know, Linux distros, whatever. Every now and then I'll do one, like I did one for Windows 10. You know, I primarily install new distros or different OSs if I want to show something, okay? So like, Shatter, hello Geek Outdoors and everybody good day. What's up, Shatter? And so, going back to the NotPetya ransomware, and the reason why it's called NotPetya is because this is based upon the original Petya ransomware, which is actually created by a crime organization that originally created this to actually extract money. They did it for business reasons, okay? And this particular version, it's not built to get money. It's just simply built to destroy and disrupt. Okay, and so it also even affected law firms. Okay, so let me list some of the other companies that it affected. Okay, the Danish shipping company Maersk, M-A-E-R-S-K, Merck, as I mentioned earlier, the Russian oil giant Rosneft, British Ad Agency WPP, and British law firm DLA Piper. And so I really want to get into the whole impact, because, you know, we're going to be talking about this pretty much continuously. Ransomware, attacks. I want to talk about, in general, my thoughts of the real impacts of this, okay? Because cyber warfare, it's probably the most, I would say, powerful and also the most effective way to basically disrupt other countries. Have war. This is really war, okay? And let me explain why. So, first and foremost, if you think about traditional war, right? Warfare between different nations, it's expensive, okay? Like, for example, if you were to buy a missile, right, for an airplane, so like a fighter jet pilot, it could cost over $80 million or more for just one missile, all right? Or even if you think about battleships, fleets of, you know, like tanks or ships or whatever, that's billions and billions of dollars. And then you have to think about all the people involved to go fight those wars. So I'm thinking about it from like a cost standpoint and even time, right? So if countries were to go to war with other countries and they went the traditional route, it's expensive. There's a lot of lives involved, right? And a lot of time involved. And so the whole point of the war is not only to conquer your enemies, right? But it's to disrupt everything. Their entire economies, their way of living, you know, their lifestyle. And so with cyber warfare, you can do all of that, and even more actually, and it's cheap. You know, there's like pretty much very little resources financially. You don't have to go out and buy billions of dollars worth of weapons, okay, because your weapon is the software that you've created, okay? And then also, you don't have to have people. You don't have to have human casualties. So you don't have to send potentially millions of people to die in a war. And so for your country, you know, you don't have to, you know, waste people's lives for that, okay? So there's another element of it. And also, right now, and this is, I'm not a securities expert, but like these billion-dollar companies, all these security firms, all these governments, they still can't track these people. Okay, so you have another layer of like anonymity. So if these big companies, big government institutions, if they can't stop this, they can't even track them. Whereas in war, it's easier to track them than this cyber warfare. And so there is another advantage to the cyber warfare. Okay, and so another thing with cyber warfare, let's talk about like the actual impact to people. Okay, because so whenever we get a virus, malware on our computers, right? It's horrible. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and you could lose all your data, especially very private information. Then when it hits businesses or governments, of course, they're going to lose money, they're going to lose time. But let's think about the human impact, right? With the WannaCry, initially, it affected hospitals. And so people were not able to get to hospitals, right? That's serious. But now, this is not only hitting hospitals. You know, these things can hit power grids, which they have before. You don't have power. It's hitting banks. You don't get access to your money. So, and then if you think about big drug companies like Merck, well, the drugs, people use the drugs, so they might not have access to their drugs. And then if you think about even something like oil companies, right? So if they disrupt that, then you don't have access to oil, so you're not going to have gas, okay? Or you might not have heat in your homes. And then when you think about even like your shipping companies, right? You might think, oh, that doesn't affect me, but it does. There's tons of shipping that goes, trillions of dollars of shipping that goes on every day, including essential things like food, okay? And so also, as these things get more sophisticated, they're going to hit things that affect people. All of these things hit people. Your financials, your health, your hospitals, your food, your shipping. And then when they hit things like power grids and your water systems, you could kill literally millions and billions of people. I mean, if it went on that scale. And so that's why cyber warfare is so powerful, because we are so dependent upon technology. I mean, and actually, this latest one, it even affected radiation scanning software for Chernobyl. And so imagine if it hit these reactor plants, and then it hit power grids, and then it hit water supplies, you're going to see massive, not only like financial and government disruptions, but you could have a lot of potential casualties, a lot of people dying. And so that is why cyber warfare is the next level of warfare. And in terms of cost, it's way cheaper for any of these countries to actually do it. But the actual impact that it has is actually pretty severe. I would say, in my opinion, more severe than a traditional war, because with cyber warfare, you could affect billions of people everywhere. Everywhere. Okay? And so that is something that is going to continually become more and more of, not only news, but become more and more of our livelihoods, unfortunately. Okay, so those are my thoughts on the NotPetya ransomware, you know, and also my thoughts in general of how this is involved with cyber warfare. Now, I am going to answer some questions first, but then I also want to get into, like, for us as individual users, what are some ways that we can kind of, I wouldn't say protect ourselves, because there's only so much we can do, but how can we have like a layered approach to basically, you know, having our data available, okay? So if things like this do happen, okay? So let me go and see who's on the chat, because some more people came in. All right, so Shatter is talking about, okay, hey Taha, what's going on? Gemini from Holland, awesome. You know what? thank you so much for all of you coming. I've said that every episode, but there's people from all around the world that actually watch the channel and then actually have these videos. So thank you very much. And so, so True Living Southern Organic. Okay, Rose is okay. So I'm gonna try to start from the top. Rose, good. Geek talking about ransomware, which is interesting. Yeah, I honestly, Rose, I don't like talking about it, but at the same time, I do like talking about it because I think it's important, you know, because these things do really affect people. You know, if they didn't affect people, I don't think I would talk about it. But in the end, all of these things that are happening, they do affect people in the end. Okay, I mean, like for example, if your data got compromised, you know, not only will you not have access to things like, you know, like when they hit hospitals or banks or whatever, but also think about if you work at the company as well. If the company is having data, you know, their data has been compromised and then you can't work, guess what? You might not have a job, or you might make money that day, and obviously that money is used to take care of your families. Okay, so there's a real human impact to these things. Okay, so that's the reason why I talk about them, and obviously it's all over the news, but really that's really the whole issue. You know, it impacts people in the end. Okay, so let me see. So True Living Southern Organics asks, hackers are cheap compared to machines. Yeah, the hacks are the modern warfare. Yep, definitely. Rose asks, do you suggest install Rootkit ClamAV on your Linux machine also? You know, Rose, I've done a couple security type videos. Like I said, I'm not a securities expert, I'm more of a general. So I am planning to do, I had a real popular video like last year. It was like Linux security versus Windows 10 security, and it's more like for general users. Okay, so I will do an update to that. I'm planning on it, and so I'll go over ClamAV and rootkits and stuff like that as well. Okay, because in my opinion, for Linux desktops, the majority of people, they don't have AV, you know, antivirus. But it really depends on your actual use of it. Okay, so I'll discuss that in a later episode. Okay, so. Okay, so Taha says connection is crap in Holland here. I've never been to Holland. I have been to Frankfurt, Germany though. Shatter asks, any latest version of System D user update your OS ASAP version 223 System D, including upstart of Ubuntu 16, Debian 7.9, and then there was another one, 17.04. Said yes. So True Living. You're right, there's no way to find them all super high successes. Those drugs are actually, and this was True Living in response. He's responding to some stuff that I talked about, you know, it affected companies. I was talked about Merck. It affected a big drug company as well that not pay a ransomware. Those drugs are actually filed by machine. They can just tell them to put more or less or something inside the machine. That's correct. Shatter asks, AV is biggest virus ever. Your using habit is a main issue and cause getting malware virus, especially while you're on the internet and browsing. You know, Shatter, you know, there's antivirus software. You know, it's kind of like a necessary evil. Okay, in some cases, it can be argued that the antivirus companies themselves are the one that create these viruses and malware, because if they weren't available, they wouldn't make money, right? And in another case, and I mentioned this earlier, they're very invasive. You know, they can get a lot of information from your user, you know, your actual use habits on their antivirus programs, which is something that I'm pretty sure that they do. But at the same time, I mean, when we're on a Linux desktop, we really don't think about it because antivirus is not something that most Linux desktop users use. Okay, but for mostly Windows users and then some Mac users, you know, it's kind of like a necessary evil, you know, because with those machines, you know, or specifically Windows machines, you know, that's the main target for a lot of these institutions or companies or hackers or whatever you want to call them. Okay, and so, okay, lost your connection. Yeah, True Living says not to get too political, but we're feeling the effects of that in the U.S. Okay. Big Brother's watching. Okay, Taha Gemini says antivirus software is needed, but the AV within Windows is good enough, but the biggest virus is the user. Absolutely, Taha. I agree with you. Okay, on my video, I might put a link up here or something, a card or a link below. But it was from last year, so I'll make an update to it. But whenever we talk about security, okay, one thing that I always stress is common sense. You know, common sense is your best natural antivirus, okay, or whatever the case might be. And you know, as these attacks get more and more sophisticated, in some cases it's harder and harder to prevent this, but I still think common sense is still number one, okay. And with that being said, that's what I want to talk about next, okay. So how can we as users, you know, protecting ourselves, you know, that could be a whole different discussion, okay. But in my opinion, I'm thinking more of like, what can you do to recover from attacks? Okay, that's what I'm really thinking about. Because when I worked in you know, IT in corporations and production environments, good companies will have a recovery plan. Okay, because you have to plan for the worst. Okay, when your companies do not have a plan for worst case scenarios, it's bad. I mean, it's bad for business, and your company could go under. I mean, you could get sued. You know, and also at the same time, it's always good to have these habits, okay? So, and it's very simple. It's not even complex, to be honest with you. So it's backups. That's pretty much it. I mean, like, it doesn't have to be anything complex. You know, you could back it up on a USB drive or an external hard drive, okay? Now, in terms of your protection in the front, let me see right here. Top Shatter says Linux antivirus software. Okay, Shatter as Linux have better firewall protection if you're using Fedora, SEO Linux, Ubuntu, SUSE. Yes. So there's like protection in two areas. Okay, and it all ties into recovery as well in a way. Okay, so your protection on the front end could be the programs that you have to protect yourself. Firewalls, okay, and you know, Linux already has a built-in firewall. It's IP tables, but I use GUFW, which is the GUI front end to do that. Firewall, just some basics, okay. If you're on Windows, even though I don't like antivirus programs, I think you're gonna have to have it, okay. So in general, these are like the basics, okay. Have some type of firewall, okay, very basic, and then antivirus programs for Windows, yes. For Linux, if you want some antivirus solution, I would suggest ClamAV or Sophos. Okay, Sophos does have a Linux version, and Sophos is used in Mac operating system, which is Unix based. Okay, so that's if you want an antivirus solution, and this is very simple. Okay, this isn't very complex. Firewall, if you want some type of antivirus solution. Okay, and then third, some type of encryption. Okay, and I did do an episode on encryption as well, and so I'll leave the card up there, and I'll also leave in the description area below. And what I'm talking about here is you can use things like GPG, which will encrypt files, or CryptKeeper, which can encrypt whole folders. Okay, so that's in general. Okay, and the reason you're doing this is security in any sense. It's a layered approach. You know, there's no systems anywhere, especially in businesses, where they're just like, here, let me install this. Great, we're secure. No, security is a layered approach. So it starts with software, and then it goes down to physical things. Okay, they have physical drives that they're backing up all their data on. You know, they have physical servers for the recoveries and stuff. So there's a physical element, and then obviously there's the common sense part. And so it's a layered approach. So once you have the software, once again, this is very general, okay? Firewall, some type of antivirus if you need it, and then encrypt your really important files and folders. That way, if they were to compromise your systems, it takes them longer. Okay, so the whole idea of a layered approach to security is, it's not that these people, hackers, they're actually, the technical term is actually called, I think, crackers, if I'm not mistaken. But hackers, if they get into your system and you have a layered approach, it just makes it more difficult for them to actually compromise your system. So that's the whole point of having layered security, okay? And then the second part of that is your data backup and recovery process. Okay, so as I said, very simple, external USB, external hard drives, and do it regularly. Okay, if you're the type of person who has a lot of data, you're changing a lot of things, I'd back up once a week if you can, or for some people, if it's a lot of things, you know, you might have to back up it once a day. Okay, and of course, if you have a more complex system setup where you have a secondary drives and it does it automatically, like a RAID server, then great. But I'm talking about general users. General users, stick in one of these, copy and paste it. Done. You have your backups. You know, it might not be the most recent, but it's close enough. Okay? And then, in terms of like your recovery, yeah, if you have a backup, it's very simple. Now, if you have a Windows machine, okay, there are cases, and I've had this happen before. I think anybody who uses Windows, this has happened before. And the reason why I'm talking specifically about Windows is because, let's be real, all of these people creating these programs to take advantage of exploits, they're going to hit Windows first, okay? And you could get into the whole debate about how secure it is underneath. But the reality is, they're written for the Windows platform. They're not written really for the other platform. With that being said, okay, if you had really sensitive information, okay, my recommendation, if you can do it, have a separate Linux machine for all your sensitive stuff, okay? Because let's think about it this way. If you have a multi-machine setup, multi-platform, which most people do, I think nowadays, most people will have a Windows machine and a Mac machine. That's not uncommon. And then some people will have Windows, Mac, and Linux, okay? Like for myself, if I had a Windows machine, I do have Windows on a virtual machine, but if I had a physical Windows machine, say I needed to run programs like Adobe, right? Or I had AutoCAD. Those don't run on Linux, okay? So I would have a Windows machine. But here, or I'm a gamer, I would have a Windows machine. So you would use your Windows machine just to like game or do whatever you need for that Windows machine, okay? And then most of what we do online is on the internet browser. We're using web app and stuff. And so I think for the majority of people, they only have a Windows machine or Apple machine around just for specific things. Like for example, if you had an Apple machine, you might have it because Final Cut Pro. I'm just giving you an example, okay? So in my opinion, you can still use your Linux machine for all your daily stuff, which is on the internet browser, okay? So in that case, if you had a Windows machine, right? And even if you're doing backups, there's potential that, say you had your files were infected with a virus or malware. Well, you've just made a backup of, you know, files that have viruses and malware, which isn't good at all. But if you were to have a separate Linux machine, if possible, then you could still do all your computing and your most private information on your Linux machine, and then on your Linux machine, you would have the basics. A firewall, an antivirus. I think mainly if you have other Windows machines, like if you're in a networked environment, I think that makes sense. And I'm talking about Linux desktop. And then finally on the Linux desktop, some type of encryption, PGP, CryptKeeper, okay, are the two that I use, okay? And then you would do all your normal computing on the browser, all your private information would go there. And then you would back that up too. I know it's like a very complicated approach, but that way your chances of having your backups infected is a lot lower, because once again, you know, these programs target Windows-based machines. And so that's my like very general, simple way to, you know, mitigate problems. Okay, so one, you have the very basic software protection. Of course, you could get really complex with security. You know, you could get a SEL Linux, I'm sorry, which is secure Linux, and then you could do a lot of other things too, but for the majority of general users, this is very simple, okay? So that way, not only you have some measure of security in terms of layers, and even if they were to break into your system, your stuff is still encrypted, they have to get through that as well. Then even if your whole system were to crash or it got encrypted, you know, through ransomware, then your second part of that is you still have some type of recovery method. You know, you have backups, okay? And so that's my very simple approach to, you know, basically trying to not only protect yourself, but also to recover if you ever had problems with things like this, NotPetya or WannaCry or whatever new ransomware comes up in the future. Okay, so those are my thoughts, okay? And Once again, like I said earlier, when it comes to security, you can get extremely complex. You know, I'm not, like I said, I am not a securities expert, but if you had, I think, some of these basics for a general user, I think that would help not only save you from having your data compromised, okay, but even if your data were to get compromised or you have problems, you also have a backup recovery plan as well. Okay, so that's pretty much my whole discussion on not only the NotPetya ransomware and what I think about it, but also some very general things that you can do to help yourself in case this ever happens, and also to help avoid it as well. Okay, so so common sense first, great avoidance, but then all those other things I talked about. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the second part of the live episode, and that's gaming. And if you notice back here, if you're familiar with this game, it's Afterburner 2. I'm a huge lover of Sega. I've loved them ever since they were in the arcades. Of course, I'm also a Nintendo lover as well. And Sega, the last amazing game system they had was the Sega Dreamcast. I absolutely love that. I've had the Sega Master System, Genesis. I didn't buy the Sega CD, that was crap. And I didn't buy the Sega 32X. I also had the Sega Saturn as well. And Sega, they've had a pretty rough years ever since, you know, the Dreamcast. You know, I know they became a software developer, but now Sega is kind of like trying to make a comeback again. So what they did was they just released this new thing called Sega Forever. Okay, and if you don't know what Sega Forever is, it's basically Sega releasing a lot of their older games from the Genesis all the way up to the Dreamcast for mobile apps, both on Android and iOS. And now I did download it. Okay, I downloaded Altered Beast, Phantasy Star 2, Kid Chameleon, and Sonic. And what it is, very simple. It's an emulator. I mean, all of these are emulators, and I'll get into that as well when we talk about the Super Nintendo Classic as well. And if you haven't tried it, it is free. So what Sega's doing is they're providing all these games for free, right? But you can also do a paid option. So the free option, they'll actually have ads, okay? And then the paid option is like $2, okay, for you to get no ads. And it does connect to their server some way, and so yeah, phone. So True Living sounds amazing. Phone Sega, yeah. So like these actual emulators, I've tried them, and I'm not gonna lie, it's not a good experience. I'm just being real. And there have been people on the internet talking about, but me, you could download it on your phone and try it out yourself. You know, they had frame rate issues. I was playing Altered Beast. It's slow, you know, and at the same time, you're still using a virtual, you know, keypad. So I can already do that with the many available emulators on the mobile device. Okay, and then the ads, I know you have to have ads because, you know, that's how they make their money, right? But it affects it. You know, there's ads at the beginning, and then there could be ads in between transitions. And so, you know, I don't like that experience. And even if you pay the $1.99, the performance sucks. Okay? So, and Sega is saying that they did this because they were in discussions with RetroArch. And RetroArch is a very popular emulator front end, but due to the open source nature of that, and then due to licensing issues, Sega decided not to use their technologies. And so what they decided to do was to create their own emulator, okay? And honestly, it absolutely sucks. I mean, and if you think about it, right? Our phones that we have, these are super powerful. And remember, these games came out like 30 years ago, and you're having performance issues on that, okay? Which is bad. And so the way that this emulation program is built for Sega Forever is that there is an emulator underneath, but then they have Unity on top of it. Okay, so then they can do things like serve you ads, they could track you, and so forth. And that doesn't help the experience. It actually slows things down. And so in this modern age, you can have a phone that is thousands of times more powerful than your Sega Genesis, but yet the performance is not as good as your Sega Genesis. So in my opinion, with Sega Forever, I think like the intention of it, okay, because they're going to release Dreamcast games in the end too that will work on your mobile devices. But if you're having that many problems even emulating Sega Genesis games, it's going to be absolutely horrible. by the time it gets to Dreamcast, unless Sega fixes things. And so the idea of Sega doing this, I'm very happy. I was like, man, this is going to be awesome, especially for all the Sega lovers out there, you know. Of course, you could always download emulators. You know, lots of people do it all around the world, okay? And I would get into that with the Super Nintendo Classic as well. But, you know, the whole idea of this was it's officially from Sega, and when you download it, there's no setup or anything, you know, you just press play like any normal app. Okay, so it was supposed to be a very simple process. But in order for this stuff to work, the experience has to be good. Okay, and so far with Sega Forever, the experience is just not good. Okay, and in terms of games, I already mentioned the ones earlier, but you can also get Crazy Taxi as well, which is not a Sega Genesis game. That is actually a Dreamcast game. So they have already a Dreamcast. And I've already downloaded Crazy Taxi before Sega Forever came out, because Sega did have already games on App Store. They had Virtual Tennis, Crazy Taxi, and they were awesome. They worked really well. And so, if you haven't also seen the Sega Forever commercial video, it's funny. It reminds me so much of the old Sega commercials. You know, it's like in your face, and it's like go to the next level, or blast processing. And so, if you actually look at the actual Sega Forever commercial, it's very similar to that. So I really did like the commercial. So in terms of what Sega Forever, I think that if Sega improved the performance and the user experience, you know, it will be successful. But at this point, first and foremost, the performance sucks. The user experience is horrible. Okay, I would say it's horrible because of the actual performance. It's just bad, and then also the ads. It's just bad, you know. And so I don't like that portion of it. So if they could fix those things, then it will really help bring the Sega brand back. I would love to play Revenge Shinobi. You know, one of my favorite games of all time. Very simply, and you know, if it's the free version, I don't mind there being ads, just as long as it does not get into the way of the actual gameplay itself. Okay, and so Sega Forever, hopefully it'll stay longer than the Dreamcast, and hopefully, like I said, Sega will make improvements, and I can't wait until they release more and more games. So we'll see as the time goes. Okay, now that actually goes into another thing, which is the Super Nintendo Classic, and we knew this was coming. We knew this was coming. You know, the Nintendo Classic, it's no longer being sold. That's sold like hotcakes as normal. Nintendo is absolutely the boss when it comes to marketing stuff and repackaging it and selling it. Okay, and so as you remember, the Nintendo Classic was like, I think it was $70? No, $60. Yes, $60 US. Okay, and it came with like 30 games, and you can hack it now. Hackers have been able to hack it, because the way that the Nintendo Classic worked, you didn't have like an SD card or anything, so you couldn't add new games. It was on NAND memory, okay, and so you couldn't do it, okay, you couldn't add new games. But hackers were able to hack it, and you can add new games. And then now, the Super Nintendo Classic has been announced, so this is going to be only $80 on September 29, 2017. Now you're playing with superpower. That's funny. And if you remember the tagline, Nintendo was now you're playing with power, right? And so with this one, you don't get 30 games, you get 21 games. Yeah. All right, 211. Talk to you later. Thanks for joining. And yeah, so this one only has 21 games. So here are my thoughts on this, okay? And this is why I want to talk about emulation. Okay, because all of these things run on emulators, okay? And if you actually looked at Nintendo's policies on emulation, they absolutely hate emulation. If anything, if you use an emulator, they consider you a criminal, period. Unless it's from authorized, you know, places like Nintendo, okay? So there's always going to be the issue of legality, okay, piracy, versus the historical benefit of having emulation, okay? And I'm not going to get into a long debate about it, but in my opinion, the historical part of it is extremely, extremely valuable, because Nintendo themselves use emulator, and they actually downloaded ROMs, illegal ROMs, because there was a story a while back, and like a while back, meaning like January of this year, where Eurogamer found out that the Wii Virtual Console, the emulator, right? They used an emulator and they downloaded ROMs based upon the iNES emulator. Okay? And iNES was one of the very first ones. And it was the one that made popular the .NES extension. So if you had a .NES extension on your file, then that would work on the iNES emulator. So Nintendo, for a game, Super Mario ROM, actually was the same exact ROM that you could download off the internet. Which is, wow, it blows your mind. And so all of these companies, they themselves use emulators. Why? Because all the emulations that's been done for years, right? A lot of people argue, well, you know what, if you want to be legal, you should have a copy of the game. Well, there's like thousands of games. You're not going to be able to find those games anymore, especially if they're arcade games, right? Or like old computer games. You're not going to be able to find that. But because of the whole emulation community, mainly with places like MAME, you know, and then RetroArch, RetroPie, there's so many of them. They did a historical thing for people. They were the ones who actually created this massive amounts of ROMs that you can no longer get anymore physically. Even Nintendo themselves can't get these ROMs. And so, you know, that there's a huge benefit. Sega themselves. So if they can't, the actual companies that created these games or have access to them, they can't get the old ROMs themselves, or they don't have a good version of ROMs, and they're downloading the actual ROMs from illegal places themselves. You know, that argument of them saying that people who use emulation is criminal is absolutely hypocritical. And at the same time, what they've effectively done is they're basically using the same emulators or a modified version emulators that you can download, or they'll even use the exact same ROM file. They'll repackage it in a very nice console or mini console and then sell it back to you, the consumer, but also restrict the types of games you can play on it. You know, and even they could probably even restrict your access, right? And you also have to buy Nintendo or Sega or whatever the case might be approved accessories and games. Okay, and don't mistake it. They can actually track how long you play these games as well. So there's also a marketing aspect to it as well. And so with all of that being said, you probably get my thoughts on this. The SNES Classic, just like the NES Classic, I don't see why you would get it except for nostalgia purposes. I mean, even though they said, you know, they created their own emulator in-house, like the NES Classic. They had a team called Nerd that had their own in-house emulation, but let's be real, they'd use an existing emulator, and they're probably using the same exact ROMs. And the ones who hacked the NES Classic, you can use the iNES emulator ROMs with the .NES extension, and they would work on the NES Classic. So that tells me that it's based upon the iNES emulator. And so even these big companies like Nintendo that says it's criminal to use emulation, they themselves are doing it. And it's only good and okay when they could charge you, the consumers, and then charge you even more later on and even control your access to games, you know, because it's okay if they do it. And so with that being said, I wouldn't buy the Super Nintendo Classic. You know, I could get better emulation on my computer, on my laptop, on my phones. And on top of it, I'm not restricted by them. Okay? And if you're the type of person who's like, this is piracy and stuff, well, just because you have the physical copy doesn't mean that you're quote-unquote safe in other countries. Okay? Because each of the laws are different. Okay? And so being a content creator myself, I understand the value of it. You don't want things to be stolen that you created and then made a profit of. But this is where the debate between historical and piracy comes into the case. And so just my examples earlier, you can't access some of these ROMs anymore. It's just not available. And so if these people, like the MAME organization, if they didn't do any of this, we would lose these games forever. Okay? And you know, for anybody who actually plays retro games, which I think a lot of people do, let's be real, a lot of people run emulated games. Even these companies use emulation, right? I myself, when I have access and I could play my older games that I love from the brands and companies that I like, I actually buy more games. Okay? So these older games, they're not profitable anymore. And if they did not have these emulations, they would be forgotten. But now, with access to all of these, you can still enjoy them and you don't forget them, and you continually buy games from these companies if they still exist. So that's my thought on the Super Nintendo Classic. Just like the Nintendo Classic, I don't think it's worth it unless you are really nostalgic and you like the look, the physical look. That's the only reason I would buy it. Okay, because when it comes to pure emulation and gameplay, I could do better elsewhere. Okay, so those are the three main topics that I wanted to talk about today. The NotPetya Ransomware, Sega Forever, and the Super Nintendo Classic. Now we're going to our bonus area, and you could field questions to me, and I could also answer some other questions that I didn't answer earlier. Let me see. So I think Shatter had when Clam AV Sophos are free. Yep, and you buy other AV for Linux. What's the game running on behind the monitor? Oh, I think I just mentioned that, Shatter. The game running behind the monitor is Afterburner 2. And Afterburner 2 was... and I love Sega in the arcades. Okay? In my opinion, the best game companies back then in the arcade, and still now, was Sega and Namco. They made absolutely the best arcade games. Oh yeah, and Konami. And Capcom. Well, okay, so there's four of them, but my top two is Sega and Namco, because Sega, they built like the best cabinets, man. Their gaming cabinets were awesome. So Afterburner and Outrun was one of the, especially Outrun, there's awesome experience. If you remember Afterburner, you remember actually at the actual fighter pilot joystick, and that was sweet. You really felt like you were a fighter pilot, and I love the sounds and everything, and it was super fast. Okay, and then in Outrun, because of Yu Suzuki, his team did all this. AM2, his AM2 division, AM3 divisions. And then, when Outrun came out, I felt like I was driving in a car. So that's what that is. That is Afterburner 2. Absolutely one of my favorites. Afterburner, the one before that, that was when I first experienced it. And then obviously we also had Hang On and Super Hang On. It actually had the actual bike itself. Okay. So, is there anything that y'all had, any questions? Because, okay, Geek, do you use DOSBox for Linux? No, I don't. But you know what? I was thinking, Rose, I'm glad you mentioned that. And, this bonus round, y'all, it's really dependent upon what you, the viewers, had questions on. Because I've already talked about what I wanted to talk about, so this is more of like a discussion. And so Rose was asking, do I use DOSBox for Linux? No, but I think I will, because if you watch any of my earlier episodes, my very first computer, my first personal computer that I had at home, because of my best friend, was the Commodore. Okay, he had a Commodore 64, and I thought I had the Commodore 64. Hey Gaza, what's going on? I thought I had the Commodore 64, but now that I think about it, I actually have the Commodore 128. And so what does that have to do with DOSBox? Well, I'm going to run some Commodore 64 emulators and also DOSBox. So once again, we're talking about emulation. And so then I could like relive some of my older games. And I enjoyed DOS, actually. And, since I used the Commodore before that, I was used to doing the command line. And my favorite game on the Commodore 64 was... this Bruce Lee game. It's pretty sweet. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, there was this Bruce Lee game on the Commodore. It had Bruce Lee, and then it had this fat sumo character. It was really fun. Okay, so Shacha asked, MAME for Linux. Yes, MAME for Linux. Yeah, but there's also things like, let me show you another one. There's many different types of emulators available on Linux. And you could also do things like, right here, I have RetroPie, if you're not familiar with that. Actually, yes, RetroPie is a multi-emulator system. So I have this on another machine. I have it in a virtual machine. So there are many options there. And I just happen, my favorite is MAME, okay? And so you could actually get that on Linux as well. So, and let me see, Lance, later. All right, thanks a lot for joining. Thanks, Lance, thanks for joining. Okay, now Taha asked, would you pay for Linux if you had to? Taha, absolutely I would pay for Linux. Okay, so and I mentioned this before in some episodes, I love open source, okay? But I love proprietary as well. To me, I just love software. I love software that actually is valuable and will actually help you, okay? So if there is a software that you enjoy, that you actually get a lot of value in, that's why I donate to software that I enjoy. I do both open source and proprietary, okay? And so I pay for it. And if Linux was paid, I would absolutely pay for it. Why? Because it gives so much value. It gives so much freedom, you know? And so, yeah, if Linux were to charge, and there are Linux distributions that do charge, like Red Hat Linux, right? The commercial versions. Yeah, so, but you're really paying for the support. So absolutely, I would pay for it. You know, I would pay for any service or donate for any service that actually provides value. Okay, so, and you know, even though Linux is open source and it's quote unquote free, you know, there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time on it, right? You know, I mean, it's not free. Okay, there's people who spend thousands of hours on this. There's thousands of people around the world. And so I always want to say, if there is software or services that you get a lot of value from, and especially if they're free, right? I think you should really donate and help them, because it's not, you know, like even like you're doing this, right? You're not getting paid for this, right? So, you know, people have to live as well. And so, and if you don't support them, when they run out of money, remember, they need money to pay for the developers, they need money to pay for servers, they need money to pay for hosting, they need money to pay for customer service if they have that. And, you know, so if they don't have the money to continually fund what they love, then you will no longer see this software, you know, and that's happened a lot in the open source community. Okay, so if there is a software or services, whether it's open source or proprietary, that you really enjoy, either buy their product or donate to them. Okay, that's my opinion, and that's pretty much always going to be my opinion. Okay, and I've been in the IT field, I've done some development myself, and obviously being a content creator myself, so I understand how much work is involved and how important it is to have support, you know, for you to continually do that. So yeah, so that's a great question. How many ROMs for Linux you got? Well, you know, considering that the whole piracy whatever issue, I'm not going to say how many ROMs I have, okay, but I do have ROMs, let's just say that, okay. And okay, Shatter, free, but devs are working hard for users, so why not donate free and open source devs community? Yes, exactly. And also, y'all, let me just briefly, Shatter, let me talk about ROMs really quick, okay. If you go to a website, okay, there is a website that's owned by the same company that did the Wayback Machine, okay? And they have hundreds or thousands of emulators cataloged there for historical uses, but it runs on a MAME emulator, okay? So it's the Wayback Machine. That site, it actually has Wayback, and then they actually have, oh yeah, if you go to archive.org, they have a Wayback thing for arcade games as well. I'm not sure if it's still there. It should still be there. Let me see. Projects, yeah. Okay, so if you go to the Internet Arcade for archive.org, they have MAME and ROMs. Okay, and so they are running emulators as well, and so they have thousands of them. So you could go check that out there as well. And so, let me see. Gaza, what would you say is the minimum spec for GPU to run an emulator? I don't know, Gaza. I mean, if anybody who's run emulation, you know, it's been around since like the 90s. You know, yeah, it's been around a long time. So you don't need really powerful hardware to run it. Yeah, so unless you're running like more, I would say unless you're running like more modern games. You know, like say you're running like a Capcom game running on the CPS3 board, or you're running Dreamcast or PlayStation or Xbox, you know there's emulators for all those too. And so if you're not running anything like that, I mean, your mobile phones can run them. So yeah, I don't think the hardware specs are, you know, you don't need a lot of powerful hardware specs. And so, yeah, Pentium, Celeron, I mean, once again, your mobile phone can run it. And you know what you could do with your mobile phone? Okay, because I've done this before, right? Your mobile phones are so powerful, right? They also have, you could buy a mini USB HDMI output, right? So then you could use, because I've done this before, so you could have your emulation games on your phone, right? And then you could have your adapter to plug straight into your HDMI TV, and then you could also get a Bluetooth controller, and bam, you have a remote retro gaming system anywhere you go, which is awesome. Okay, so that's the power of emulation. You know, you could actually enjoy all your classics, however many games, you know, aside from the whole legality issues of it all, through your phone, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, Shatter, yeah, he agrees your smartphone could run MAME. Yes, it does. And actually, MAME is on Android. I don't know if it's on iOS, unless you jailbreak it. But there's actually 2 MAME emulators on Android devices, and that's actually my preferred emulator. Of course, you could download emulators like RetroArch, RetroPie. I think they're available for mobile too. I'm not sure. But they are multi-platform, you know, but they're a little more difficult to set up, you know. Yeah, MAME is on Android. Yeah, if you look it up, you just download it. Now, emulation itself, it's legal, okay, the actual programs, because they're just software tools. They're reverse engineering it, you know. But I do want to say that for different countries, they have different laws, and so the ROMs, they're basically illegal. I mean, to be honest with you, you know, that's why whenever you see videos, people talking about emulation stuff, they don't talk about where you could get the ROMs, you know. But like I said, even if you had a physical copy, which there are definitely some people who do, but there's so many ROMs out there. Like I said, if it wasn't for emulation, these ROMs would be gone. They would be wiped out from history, okay? So there's no way that you're gonna have physical copies of some of these, because they either don't exist or they're arcade machines that never had a home version. So there's no way you can play it unless somebody made an emulation of it and they actually made a ROM, okay? And so I think that's it for this episode. Spent quite a bit of time talking about both security, and one of my favorite things is retro games, and also emulation, you know. So Sega Forever and the upcoming SNES Classic, and any retro gaming that you see online, 99% of the times through the big companies, these same companies, they are using emulators themselves. And just like the example I told you with Nintendo for their Wii console version of Mario, they're using the illegal ROM, the same exact one that you would download. And so whenever you are playing a retro game, whether it's through MAME or even if it's through the official sources, then they are all using emulators and they're all using ROMs, just like you are. Okay? And so if there was nothing else in this episode, thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, Geek, I can't see your brother YouTube channel with your listing. Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to do search, but I just want to say a thank you once again for checking in. And no problem, Shatter. Nice show. Best for new one. Cheers and have a great week. Thank you. And if you are in the United States, this weekend is July 4th weekend. And I know you know, as I'm getting to learn more about my audiences internationally, I also would love to learn, maybe in the future episodes, I might want to ask, you know, what countries that you're from, because I'm international myself. I'm from Southeast Asia. I'm from Laos. Okay, so that's the country that I'm from. And I have traveled internationally as well. So maybe in the future, it'd be great if you could kind of tell me what country you're from, because I do want to learn about cultures in other countries. Okay, so that's another thing that's awesome about this. Rose asks, thanks, Geek. Happy 150 Canada Day. Awesome. I don't even know what that is. So awesome. So I get to learn a lot about other countries. Okay. And so thanks for watching. And as always, if you did get value out of these videos, leave a like and subscribe. And as always, if you wanted to support my channel further, you could do that at patreon.com/geekoutdoors. We'll see you later, child. See you on another episode.